Scene 2. As she strolled down the sunny walkway towards her first class, she noticed a steadily repeating pattern of tattered posters tacked up hastily along the brickwork. They seemed to increase in quantity the closer she got to campus. She approached a nearby wall and read the bold headline, complete with 2 grainy black and white photographs. Missing since 7/25/2022. Charles Avondale, 24-year-old male, 5 feet 7 inches tall, 170 pounds. Matthew Collins, 27-year-old male, 5 foot 11, 200 pounds. Last seen near Flagler College, St. George Street, on 7/25/2022. Please contact St. Augustine Police Department with any information related to these disappearances. Missing for just about a month now. The photos weren't of the greatest quality, but they looked like typical, handsome, college-aged guys. From what she could tell based on the varying shades of gray of their hair and skin, Charles appeared blonde and fair, while Matthew looked tan and dark-haired. They both had goofy smiles, shaggy hair, and bright futures. It was only the last week of August, yet an involuntary shiver made her body wobble slightly in place. I remember vaguely hearing about this at orientation, but there were none of these flyers posted there. Cadence had always had a fascination with unsolved mysteries. Podcasts, television series, and documentaries were a favorite lazy day binge of hers. Feels a bit more unnerving when it's not just a story on a screen. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the poster, unable to resist the urge to look up more details later. I'm no Encyclopedia Brown, but people less skilled than me have helped bring wrongdoers to justice. I'm looking at you, Reddit. She tore her gaze away from the flyer and continued towards campus for her very first class. The skinny, rusty orange peaks of Flagler's castle-like architecture finally came into view, and she couldn't help but smile to herself as the walls of the majestic building loomed nearer. It took 5 years of work and a lot of penny pinching, but I finally made it. The stone walls of the courtyard reminded her of a magnificent castle. The main entrance had sculptures of majestic lions carved into the rusty orange columns along the exterior wall. The dark iron bars of the gate were thick as young tree trunks, heavy and unyielding, and the gate itself was spread wide open to allow the excited throngs of students into the heart of the school's main building. In the center of the courtyard was an impressive multi-tiered water fountain, a circle of a dozen orange coquina stone frogs lining the pool's edge at perfect intervals, squirting streams of water playfully towards the lion-themed totem in the center. Hear me roar, she thought as she passed. A mix of excitement and nerves bubbled inside of her as she entered the building and climbed the impressive staircase to the classroom, the elegant artwork and decor making it seem like less of a school and more of an art museum. The dizzying vaulted ceiling was decorated with a detailed Renaissance-style painting, but she didn't have time to gawk. She walked briskly down the hallway, stopping at room 111 before letting out a breath and opening the door slowly. First up was a history course on the history of St. Augustine, from its initial colonization to more current matters. When she walked into the lecture room, she glanced around the long, curving tables that arched in a gentle wave rising to the back of the room, and she was relieved to see they were mostly empty. She had been mindful to arrive early so she'd have her pick of the litter when it came to seating. She beelined for a spot in the first row, eager to learn front and center for this class. Dad loved this city. I want to learn everything I can about it. She pulled the chair out slowly, lifting it a little to avoid scraping the metal legs on the floor and disturbing the few students that were present. A girl with poofy golden hair 1 chair down from her was furiously doodling a sea of cats on the cover of her notebook with a sleek black marker. The pungent smell from the permanent ink was so strong that it twinged Cadence's nostrils, even from several feet away. The girl seemed to feel herself being watched and turned her head upwards to meet Cadence's eyes with a friendly smile. "Hey," she said brightly, before returning her focus to the somewhat grueling task at hand. The tip of her tongue stuck out of her mouth as she concentrated on adding one last-minute detail to a particularly chunky cartoon feline on the growing collage. "Hello," Cadence said meekly, embarrassed to have been caught gawking at her. "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare. I love cats, and I can barely draw a smiley face. You're really talented." She grinned and turned back to her, brandishing her creation with pride so Cadence could examine it closer. "Thanks. I love them too. I'm majoring in art. I just took this class for fun." She stuck her sandy-colored hand out, smudges of black ink still clearly visible along her palm and on the side of her hand that had rested on the page. "I'm Vana." "Someone who thinks history is fun and loves cats? I'm here for it. We're practically best friends already." Cadence took her hand gratefully, relieved she hadn't minded the impromptu audience. "Cadence, I'm majoring in history and minoring in music." When she released her hand, she noticed a trace of the permanent ink had transferred over onto her own pale skin. "Perfect." She gestured to the empty chair next to her. "Sit next to me so I can cheat off you if I need to. I want to learn, but if it drags my GPA down, I'm royally fucked. I'm here on scholarship money. Affirmative action. Let's go." Cadence scrunched her face up slightly. "But won't the professor see—" "I'm kidding," she laughed. "About the cheating part, I mean. Worst case, you can just help me study. Do sit next to me, though." She closed her eyes and took a long whiff of the air near her. "You smell so much better than the guy I was stuck next to in ceramics last semester. I don't think he showered once. The entire term." "Ew," Cadence laughed as she moved her bag closer to her on the table. "That's the worst. Reminds me of the girl that sat in front of me in homeroom in high school that had IBS. I don't know how I survived the daily fumigation." Vana laughed and stuck her tongue out in disgust. "Poor thing. Both of you. My big sister has it. We shared a room growing up. I feel your pain." "Ouch. One-upped. I can't beat that." She sat down in the chair next to her new friend, watching a pair of tall, gangly male students laughing at the front of a small crowd trickling in through the front door. Their shaggy haircuts reminded her of the boys on the missing poster. "So you were here last year?" "Yep, and the year before. I'm getting there. How about you?" "This is my first semester," she said, watching the two boys take a seat near the back of the lecture hall. She turned back around to face the cheerful girl next to her. "Say, did you know those guys who disappeared?" "Know them? Not really. Charlie was in a few of my art classes last term, but it's more independent work, so we really didn't interact much. He was always painting such abstract, ethereal images. I'm pretty sure some of his work is still hanging up in the student gallery if you want to check it out." She looked lost in thought for a moment. "His boyfriend is in some band with a few other people on campus, so maybe he was a music major? I'm not sure. He wasn't in any of my art classes, though." She shrugged, seemingly fresh out of answers. "Oh, I see. I saw the flyers on the way here this morning." She couldn't resist pressing her for more information. "Have you heard any rumors about what happened?" "Sure. People always talk. Most people think they ran off to Vegas to elope." Vana smiled to herself. "They've been together since high school, and apparently had joked about doing it before. Maybe they finally stopped joking." Cadence pondered the possibility of this pleasant turn of events. "You'd think they let someone know, though, wouldn't they? Friends? Family?" Vana shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe their families were assholes about it. Maybe the pure cinematic value of a stunt like that tickles their fancy. Sounds like a pretty rock and roll thing to do." "It is," she trailed off, wondering if it could really be so. "That'd be great if they just turned up in a month, matching wedding rings and all. A real-life gay fairy tale." It seemed almost too convenient of an explanation. "Has anyone ever mysteriously disappeared from campus before? Or here in St. Augustine?" Vana frowned slightly. "No, not that I know of. But people do disappear from time to time anywhere. There's a lot of homeless and vagrant types that come through here too, since the weather is so nice, and tourists are suckers. No one can really keep track of them or know if they disappear. You know the police never give a shit about those types of people. Vana shook her head. She put both of her middle fingers up, waving them in the air. Fuck the police. You're not wrong. Cadence tapped her pointer finger on the table absent-mindedly. Still seems weird they would just ghost everyone. Clearly someone cared enough to report it and make missing posters, so you'd think they'd at least let that person know they're safe and sound. So you'd think. Guys can be such selfish assholes, though. Maybe making a big deal out of a wedding is too femme. She rolled her eyes before continuing. Just because they're gay doesn't make them exempt from toxic masculinity. I guess, she sighed, pulling her pen and textbook from her messenger bag. I watch a lot of true crime, so I suppose my mind always jumps to the worst-case scenario before anything. All right then, Sherlock. What do you think happened? Vana asked with a smirk. Cadence scoffed. Seriously? How? I have literally nothing to go on besides the poster I read earlier and what you just told me. Even Sherlock Holmes had some hard evidence before he deduced a theory. Fair enough. Better get to collecting then. Vana grinned playfully before adding, Dibs on being Watson. Can we change my name to Hotson, though? That sounds more like a man-catcher. She winked as Cadence shook her head and laughed. Whatever it takes. I'll need all the help I can get if I'm taking on a stay sexy and don't get murdered side project and starting a new semester at school. She sighed as the professor strolled through the door, the dark, thick hair on his head brilliantly streaked with several lines of silver. Murder? That's what you're leaning towards? Vana's eyes had gone round. That's definitely worst case. You're a glass half-empty girl, aren't you? She asked with a tilt of her head. Cadence looked at her plainly over the rim of her glasses. At this point in my life, I'm just glad I have a glass. Touché, she said coolly. Well, don't get too worked up. I'm sure they'll come back in a blaze of glory, gayer than ever, maybe even with a wedding casino jackpot and some live-in Chippendale strippers in tow. She gave a wistful sigh. Ah, you know what it's like to be young and in love. Truthfully, I don't know anything about it at all. Here's to hoping, she replied, and before she could ask her any more questions, the professor had shut the door and dimmed the lights for use of the overhead projector and began his introductions. Welcome to History of St. Augustine. My name is Professor Patterson, though simply Professor will suffice. I will be educating you on the history of this fine city over the course of the next 15 weeks. If you do well here, you may enroll in my advanced class next semester, which will cover more local history, but from a more flexible point of view. Think formal history mashed with legends, lore, and urban mysteries. He wrote his name neatly on the overhead to clear any confusion on his preferred title. Are you going to take that class too? Cadence whispered hopefully to Vana. Well, yeah, if you help me pass this one, sure, she replied softly. I love a good urban legend. He rapped his pointer against the whiteboard sharply. How do we know what rings true and what is fancifully created to lead us to believe otherwise? Does every legend, myth, and tall tale not have some basis in truth if you dig deep enough into its murky origin? A soft murmur of approval rumbled throughout the classroom. Being a great student of history is not just accepting what you've been told is fact, but seeking out the fine print, the light of truth shining through the cracks in between the lines that are presented as fact. He gave another smart rap on the board, pointing at what was written boldly upon it. Truth is subjective. Being a great student of history is also to be a great detective. Seek out multiple source materials, compare and contrast what you find, and draw your own conclusions based on the information collected. Many great minds throughout time have questioned those who came before, and many great minds here today, he pointed his stick out at the crowd of students, will continue this important work into the future. We cannot change the past, but we can learn from it. We have all heard the saying, history repeats itself. He bowed his head somberly. War, grief, suffering, the power of love and generosity. These are lessons humanity has failed to learn time and time again. My hope is that bright young minds like you will heed the warnings you find in the pages of your books and live your life in a way as to prevent such tragedy, even if it is on a small scale. Small things add up to big things, you see. His eyes sparkled as they found Cadence's and rested upon her. Look at the tall tale of Bilbo Baggins, for instance. Fiction, to be sure, but what it teaches us is very valid and real. No matter how small we may feel, we have the power to change the world, as long as our actions and deeds are fueled by pure intentions. The mention of a favorite old story made her heart swell. A tattered old The Lord of the Rings book she had inherited from her father, sprinkled with all of his annotations and silly observations, was one of her greatest treasures. In conclusion, I must be completely honest with you. History has its downsides. He paced across the front of the room. We can never truly know what is fact and what is fiction, as once it's recorded in ink and those who witness the events are passed on, we have no way of knowing what happened beyond what survives the test of time. Speaking of, time is something we never get enough of, in my opinion, so let's not waste any more on introductions. Open your books to page 7 and follow along, if you please. Cadence obeyed eagerly. Her brain felt like a dry sponge, ready to soak up any juicy drops of information that might help her understand what it was about this place that fascinated her father so. She recalled the few times her mother had let slip snide comments about him loving it more than he loved her. It was odd to her that she sounded truly hurt, and when Cadence had once asked her why she was jealous of a city, she'd been dismissed haughtily with a "nothing," and never given a clear answer. When she'd told her mom her intention to go to Flagler this fall, her eyes had said more about her true feelings than her words had. Cadence had seen the same hurt look in them as her mother congratulated her, though her explanation had simply been that she would miss seeing her baby girl every day. She dismissed the reverie to pay attention to the beginning of the lecture. Would be just my luck to be stuck in my head and miss something important. She gave her pen a swift stroke across the top of a blank page, ensuring its dark ink was flowing freely before she began to jot down the date. I've been waiting for this day for years. I still can't believe it's finally here. She smiled to herself as the lecture formally began. I'm finally here. As she made her way across campus after her final class, she noticed the Wiley Arts Building was on her path home. She recalled Vanna mentioning some of Charlie's artwork still hanging up in the student gallery and turned towards the door to pay her respects. I suppose if I was him, I'd want people to appreciate what I left behind. She caught her own thought, wondering why she felt in her gut, despite Vanna's comforting eloping theory, that she would never get the chance to meet either of them face to face. I mean, there's no way to know if they're okay or not until something else happens. I guess I am a bit of a pessimist, she thought, and the hollow feeling in her gut persisted as she walked down the hallway in silence. She passed a few colorfully dressed, chattering students as they were descending from a winding spiral staircase that led to the second floor. At the end of the hall, she came upon a wooden door with a gold plaque that read, Student Art Gallery. No food or drink allowed. No flash photography. She pushed the door open slowly, and it creaked on its hinges, announcing her presence to the silent, stoic creations that lived within. The small gallery was empty and quiet as a graveyard, and she was secretly thankful to have the room to herself. There were dozens of drawings and paintings lining the walls, and throughout the middle were various stands and displays that showcased sculptures, ceramics, and other physical, standalone mediums. She walked the perimeter slowly, admiring the various works. She passed several portraits, still lifes, and scenic views before finally coming to rest upon a canvas that was far darker than the rest. A half circle of hooded figures in dark robes surrounded a black-haired woman with amber skin, crouched down on her knees, cradling the body of another slender figure, slightly paler in comparison, with light brown hair. She could see the bright crimson river of blood running from the neck of the figure being held, pooling on the ground below, running into the cracks and crevices of the carved stone surface upon which they were sitting. Though she was no stranger to blood or gore in books or movies, for some odd reason, observing this gruesome work of art gave her a sick, uneasy feeling in her gut. Her pulse quickened, and when she put her hand up instinctively to her neck, she felt it pounding wildly in her jugular as she read the plaque next to the macabre painting. Aqua Vitae, Charles Avondale. Vanna did say his art was out there, but this is not what I was expecting. Guess he had some demons to exorcise. The scene reminded her of a sacrificial ritual of sorts. Immediately she thought of the Mayan, Incan, and Aztec empires she had watched various documentaries about. Often, it was considered a great honor to be chosen for sacrifice. They wanted to do it, she thought with a shudder, wondering how or why anyone could ever be convinced it was a good idea to have themselves slaughtered publicly and painfully in the name of anything. She pulled out her phone and quickly snapped a photo of the artwork, despite the warning at the door. Though the scene in the painting unnerved her, she had little evidence of her own to go on, and anything she learned that gave her an idea of who these boys were or what they might be involved in was alluring enough to collect and store, just in case. In order to connect the dots, you have to have some dots to begin with, she mused as she exited the art gallery, feeling slightly less optimistic about their triumphant return than before. Still, she hoped her cheerful new friend's theory would prevail and they'd come home safe soon, and, purely in the interest of historical academics, she could ask the artist himself what had inspired such a mysterious, macabre piece of art. She exited the arts building, and her mind drifted away from the strange painting, settling onto the other events of her day as she walked back towards her tiny apartment. She was especially proud of the way she'd had full-on conversations with 2 people and hadn't completely botched either of them. She knew her behavior at the bake shop had been nothing short of cringe, but after getting free breakfast, she couldn't deny that it had ended on a high note. Maybe I really am a social butterfly. Just late from the cocoon. As she walked along, her mind couldn't help but wander back to Melissa. I still don't understand why I freaked her out at first. It would have been too weird to ask, right? What could I have even said? Hey, what's your problem? She shook her head, wishing she could go back and somehow politely ask why seeing her, a stranger, seemed to throw her completely off balance, even if it was only for a moment. She didn't expect to get the royal treatment next time she went to La Panaderia Valenciano. Other people must work there, too, and she couldn't imagine such a ridiculous scenario ever happening again. The urge to go back was strong already, and it hadn't even been a full day. That guy at orientation wasn't lying. It is addictive. Maybe they put something extra special in the recipe, like crack. Or is there something else that makes me want to go back so bad? She supposed it was best to lay low for a few days before going back to the landmark cafe. Perhaps Melissa wouldn't be there, and she could simply place her order and leave like any other customer, though the idea of the beautiful barista not being behind the counter made the thought of returning far less appealing. She walked up the stairs to her tiny abode and fixed a simple dinner of garlic sautéed shrimp, wild rice, and roasted root vegetables before pulling her trusty herb pouch out from her bedside drawer. She began breaking up the sticky sweet buds with her fingertips, tapping them together and feeling the residue make her soft skin cling gently to itself before parting. She put the completed joint to her lips, sparked it on the first flick, and inhaled deeply, tasting the delicious tang of the homegrown flower she had smuggled all the way from her backyard garden in California. Joints weren't her typical fare, but tonight it felt like the right choice. She sank into her oversized, squishy dark green armchair. It was the one piece of actual furniture she had driven across the country to college. It had a good amount of cat hair on it still. She had insisted on not vacuuming it before taking it. It was the one piece of her kitty she still carried with her every day. You can take the cats away from the lady, but the crazy is here to stay. Once the ember began to burn too close to her fingers for comfort, she smashed the remainder into a small ashtray on the small round table next to the chair. Her nagging curiosity from earlier got the better of her, and she pulled her laptop from the coffee table and opened the search bar, typing briskly, Charles Avondale, Matthew Collins, disappearance. A string of unsettling results flooded her screen. They all seemed to have the same sad story. The two had been publicly known to be lovers and were regarded by friends and classmates as fun-loving, intelligent young men with no criminal records. Not the type to be running off into the night without telling anybody. After all, it's not like they weren't together openly. Vanna said they even joked about eloping. I just don't understand why they would be so hush-hush about it if everyone knew already. The disappearance was apparently the talk of the town, and she was just late to the party. Even the school's newspaper website had dozens of articles, each daily update with no more information than the last, seemingly just a depressing reminder that they still hadn't come home. She frowned and looked out towards the window, disturbed by the dark smudge growing on her shiny new place of residence. I know it's naive to think bad things can't happen, but 2 missing students? One of them was near her age, and their carefree, roguish smiles reminded her painfully of her own twin brother. She cleared the search browser and entered another search string, curious for more insight. Aqua vitae. The results that flooded the screen were plentiful but less than insightful. From what she could glean, it was a Latin term that referred to an alcoholic substance, ranging from a concentrated ethanol solution, used medicinally, to the distilled forms that were consumed for taste and pleasure, such as wine or whiskey. After she'd perused the etymology of the phrase and studied its origin, she stared at the photo she had pulled up on her phone and couldn't fathom why Charlie would have chosen that title for this particular work. She let out a long sigh, shutting her laptop and setting it back on the table, her idle curiosities temporarily quelled. What a long-ass day. Time to take care of me, she thought, folding her legs in a pretzel-like shape and placing her hands on her knees. She breathed in deeply to fill her chest and ribcage, then exhaled fully, feeling the effects of the relaxing breathwork on her tired body. Thoughts of the pretty barista, her new classmates, and the missing boys, and anxieties about her social interactions all seemed to melt away as the combination of stillness and THC flooded her brain with peaceful bliss. After several deep breaths, some semblance of thought began to trickle back into her pleasantly buzzing brain. I don't know why I was worrying. I shouldn't be so hard on myself. I am what I am. No need to drown in past shame or anxiety of what could be. Here and now, I am safe. I am whole. I am. The thoughts that came now were not aggressive or demeaning. They were kinder, gentler. The wisdom of many guides and teachers seemed to speak through them. Her body relaxed further. It was almost like going to sleep. As her mind emptied of daily nonsensical thoughts and her consciousness dimmed, an unfamiliar scene began to flood her inner eye. It was as if she were standing on a high plateau or balcony, taking in the vastness of a desert stretching for miles before her. The sun was blazing above, yet there was another light, too. It shone brighter than the sun and was quickly moving closer to her by the second. As it approached, her skin felt hot, sweaty and flushed. She wanted to move, but oddly she couldn't. She could see a silhouette inside the orb of light, as if something, or someone, was encased in its fiery glow. Once the orb was directly in front of her, a long arm reached out from within. The heat radiating from it seared her skin like meat crackling in a cast-iron pan. She could hardly stand it being so near. She wrenched her arm up in feeble defense. It pressed its palm against her forehead, her skull feeling a firm pressure that somehow seemed to come from the inside. Her head felt like it was swelling, uncomfortable at first, before bordering on painful. She opened her mouth to cry out, but no sound came. As the heat and pressure built to near unbearable levels, she heard a single word, spoken in a soft woman's voice, hushed yet clear. Awaken. The sound of glass shattering jolted her out of the trance, skin sticky and warm with sweat. Her breath came fast and shallow as she looked wildly around her apartment for the source of the noise, spotting the glass of ice water she had set on the table next to her earlier, somehow broken in the middle of the floor, shards glittering like gems in the light. What the hell was that? She knew the weed was clean, or she might have blamed the strange hallucination on being high. She was used to things being randomly knocked down at home. When one lived with cats, sudden thumps and noises were an everyday occurrence. But here in her lonely apartment, no convenient explanation existed. It burned, she thought, running her hand over the arm she had raised to shield herself instinctively from the heat. It felt so real. She gasped in shock when she felt the sting of her dermis as her fingers caressed the blistering skin, then pulled away sharply. She twisted her arm over to see the visual proof. Her arm had a long, thin scorch mark, fresh and raw as if she'd just burned it on an open flame. How is this possible? She thought uneasily, racking her brain for ideas. I vaguely remember watching a documentary this summer about the power of the subconscious mind. In the scene she recalled, scientists had hypnotized a man, put ice cubes upon his skin, and convinced him beyond a doubt that they were red-hot coals. The skin they touched with the cool, soothing ice burned and blistered instantly as if this were true, and he howled and screamed in pain as a result. The consensus was, when the mind believes something to be true, specifically in the subconscious realm, it will be manifested as true in the reality of the subject. I thought meditating was supposed to give me peace and harmony, not bodily harm, she thought with a sigh. Maybe it's more dangerous than I thought. She glanced at the nearby clock. Over an hour had passed since she had closed her eyes, but to her it had felt like mere minutes. I could ask Mom. Her mother was a seasoned spiritual warrior, as she liked to call it, who meditated regularly and encouraged the same practices in her offspring. She remembered her dad had, too. Nah, I don't want to worry her now that I'm so far away. Maybe this apartment is haunted. The idea made her slightly uncomfortable, but equally curious. It made as much sense as the other explanation she had to come up with. If that's you, Dad, leave my cups alone, please. Knock over a pillow or something next time. Your life insurance just barely covered my tuition, and I had to work my ass off for 5 years to pay for this apartment. I'm not made of money here. The idea of him listening to her scold him for the mess made her smile. She cleaned up the broken glass and took a hot, refreshing shower, though she couldn't help but wince when it washed over the mysterious fresh burn on her arm. As she lay in the quiet, dark bedroom, the buzz of the overhead fan began to lull her to sleep. Her eyes fell shut easily, and the tendrils of dream state began to creep up her spine. As her conscious mind surrendered control, she saw a pair of eyes deep in the darkness. They were distant and almost indistinguishable from the surrounding black, but she could see them, watching her, waiting. Yet she did not feel afraid. There was no reason to be. She felt safe and protected, watched over, looked after, cared for. Within moments, sleep overtook her, and she knew no more. Thanks for checking out Chapter 2. Hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm going to try to have at least one up a week is my goal, so stay tuned and cheers. Make sure you get your cup of coffee ready.